Sandy, and today I am going to be filming a genre recommendation video. So first of all, just to get it out of the way, I'm sitting on a leather chair which has big leather squishy arms. So for some reason this side, the arm is squeaking against the rest of the chair. So whenever I move, it decides that it wants to squeak, so please ignore that if you hear it. I have tried to make it not do that, but it's just not. I will try and even if I move my arm, anyway, I'll try and not move as much so it doesn't squeak, but not much we can do when it's a leather chair. And this is the comfiest chair I have, so I will be sticking it. So what this video is going to be is a genre recommendation video. So this video, as you will have seen by the thumbnail, is going to be a genre recommendation for historical fiction. Specifically, this is going to be historical fiction not set within World War II. I have a whole nother video for historical fiction based in World War II because that is a large chunk of my shelves. As you can see, this shelving unit here is my historical fiction one, and this is what I've been pulling my recommendations off of. So this is why it is completely decimated. I've got my fantasy shelves behind me and then my contemporary shelves there, but that is the historical fiction section, and yeah, that is pretty much decimated. So some of these recommendations might seem a bit strange. There are some things that I would expect to recommend. So for example, the Maniscalco Stalking Jack the Ripper series, I love it, but I know that I feel like an oddball for liking it because a lot of people don't like it. It is YA, it is a little bit more step back. If you do like historical fiction, maybe look into it, but just be aware that I am the oddball for liking it. So I thought I'd recommend things that are more likely to be something that everybody would enjoy, or that most people would enjoy, or that historical fiction readers or people who are wanting to get into historical fiction would also enjoy. With saying that, my Outlander series, I also have not decided to include in this video because there's at least 8 main books, and they're all like well over 500, 600, 700 pages. One of them is in fact the longest book that I have in my collection, at over 1,400 pages. So I'm not going to recommend that because that does take a lot of effort to get into. This is going to be more of a shorter series, one-stop shop, that sort of idea. So without any further ado, I'm going to get into this video. If you have any questions about these books, please let me know down below. Ask me anything you want to know. If you want to know anything about any triggers, anything like that, any substance of the books, my opinions, let me know. I will try and go over these books as best I can, but I don't want to end up with a feature-length video. First up is a trilogy that is one of the first things I read that was not World War II historical fiction, so it holds a very special place in my heart, and that is the And I Darken trilogy. So it's And I Darken, Now I Rise, and Bright We Burn. I'm just going to hold up this one because it's heavy. So And I Darken initially caught my eye because this is dumb. Initially caught my eye because it looks like it says Andy, which is my name, and then I realised it was not. So basically this is a historical fiction about the children of Dracula. Not Dracula the vampire, Dracula the man. So this follows Lada and Radu, who are the daughter and son of the Prince Vlad Dracula. And in this he rules the principality, so the prince is the highest ranking member of the royal family. And Lada is his firstborn, but is a girl, so he is brought up like a boy. So she is vicious, she is chaotic, she wants to fight and conquer and all those sort of things, but he won't let her because she's a woman. And then Radu is more like his mother, so he's very soft, very feminine, and to his father that is unacceptable, so he will do horrible things to him to try and man him up. Basically, Lada wants to take over for Vlad when he dies and become the prince, but because she's a woman she cannot do that, and Radu is just not up for the job. In this you encounter the leader of Constantinople, so they do end up going to Constantinople, and it talks about the sack of Constantinople through the eyes of these characters who are one on each side of the wall, as it were. Their friend growing up is I think he becomes the leader, I can't remember what he's called, if it's the emperor or something like that. he becomes that leader, and he basically, his father has had these children kidnapped to ensure that Vlad will behave, and they are raised alongside him in a way that they become friends, but Lada also never lets go of the fact that they are enemies, that they are prisoners, and so they end up involved in this war, and Lada in her sort of epic quest to become prince. I really like this. This is really nitty gritty. This is really dark. It really is dark, and it's not for the faint-hearted. There is a lot of blood and gore and war, torture. These, you know, it's somewhat realistic to the time, although probably not as realistic to the time as it could have been. You know, it's modernised in a way that a lot of people complain about historical fiction's not being modernised. Like, you don't need to use certain words, certain things, do certain things to show the historical time, and this writer, who is Kirsten White, I should have said that, has done that justice, I think. You also have their friend, I cannot remember his name, and that's really annoying. Mehmed, that's his name, Mehmed. Mehmed has a harem. His mother came from a harem because his father was the emperor, then he became the emperor, you know, and he wants Lada to become part of his harem, and she's like, no. And there's also this rule that if you enter the harem, you become part of the harem. It is a very complex structure, as I've learned to understand, and it's done, I think, quite well in here to show the complexities of the way these women live together, the way that these women interact with each other, the sort of ranking within it based on seniority and family, and it's so many different things. And this really does give voice to women that do not often get a voice because you were not allowed to lay eyes on the harem, you were not allowed to speak to the harem. There's so much intricacy within this trilogy that it feels like an epic fantasy world where there's so much happens, but there's only 3 books. But it's just enough. It's just enough to be exactly what it needs, if that makes sense. And these 3 follow Lada and her full life and her brother Radu. This is definitely for somebody, if you're interested in sort of dark history and history that's not often at the forefront, I definitely recommend these for you. Next up is one of my favourite authors, and that is Kate Moss. Not the running model, the author with an E on the end of Moss. So Kate Moss writes very French-centric historical fictions. Again, these are some of the first, actually these are the first non-World War II historical fictions that I read, but I read these when I was much younger, so it didn't really connect that they were historical fictions at the time, if that makes sense. So these are some of my oldest books in my collection. I can really feel, like, you can see the dents and stuff in the spine because they are chunkers. But this is kind of like a one and done set. So there is Labyrinth, Sepulchre, Winter Ghosts and Citadel are all set within the same world, within the same timeline. The characters exist in each other's timelines and worlds. However, you do not need to read one to understand the others. There is the end of Citadel. It does tie it all together because that is the last in the Languedoc arc. So Citadel, you would get little Easter eggs if you read the other books, but it's not necessary to read these books to understand the other. So Labyrinth is the sort of the first one that was released. So Labyrinth follows Alice and Alice, who are in 2 different timelines. They are spelled differently, they are said differently slightly, it is confusing. So one is in 1209, that's Alice, that's A-L-A-I with the 2 dots, S, and she is a 17-year-old daughter of a lord in the Languedoc, which is a region of France. So it was before France was France. So there was the northern territories, which were France, and then the southern, which were the Languedoc. You may also hear the term Occitan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's how I've always heard it in my head. And Occitan is a language, a French language. It is a precursor to the modern French. It is what the southern people spoke in the Languedoc, so Languedoc area. And basically the French have decided they want to unite France with the Languedoc to make one big country of France, and to do that, anybody who goes against them, they will kill. They will slaughter them and take over their territories. So Alice's father is against this. He's also part of a religious, not religious sect, but because it covers many different people with religions. It's kind of like similar to sort of Dan Brown's view of the Masons and things like that. So it's this secret society where you don't necessarily know who else is in it, and they protect the Holy Grail. They protect the Holy Grail through this society and sort of hide it from crusaders who are trying to find it, and these crusaders obviously coming from places like France. So Alice is dealing with that, all while there's also family drama going on because her sister, who is kind of a bitch to be honest, is kind of with these crusaders, and Alice is not. Alice is more like her father, so she wants to follow in his footsteps, and eventually she has to be sent on a quest to reunite or to hide these 3 books, which are like precursors to the Bible, and she is sent on that mission because her father can no longer go. Alice in the future, so Alice in 2005, she is helping her friend who is an archaeologist on this dig, and she goes up to a region of this mountain where she's not supposed to be, disturbs the soil, this massive rock rolls away from the covenant of a cave. I'm just getting the connection now, and I've read this book how many times? And of course she sees this, and instead of going, oh, maybe I shouldn't go in there, she is pulled towards it. It almost has like a spiritual pull that is pulling her in. So she goes into this, you know, cave that she knows nothing about, really shouldn't be doing, and finds 2 skeletons. And that sort of kickstarts Alice's involvement in what happened back in the 1200s. So she goes back, her friend finds her, goes mental at her because she's just ruined an archaeological dig. They have to phone, you know, they have to get the police in to make sure that all of their skeletons, and they know they're probably hundreds of years old, they have to get the police in. It's procedure. For so many places, still is procedure. And then there are these people that start to come after Alice because they're looking for something that was in the cave that is now gone, or that they think is in the cave but is now gone. And you track Alice and Alice through these timelines as they become sort of closer together, and their timelines start following each other. I feel like I'm not doing a great job at describing this book. It really, really is a fantastically well written book, and you switch between the two in such a seamless way that you can see how this all ties together and how it's all going to get to the end. They did do a TV series on this, and I thought it was horrendously bad, but I love the book so much. I just think Kate Moss is a fantastic author. She's an auto-buy author for me. With other books, Sepulchre is also a dual timeline. Most of them are a dual timeline that she writes, definitely in the Languedoc series, and it switches between sort of present day and back when. So Sepulchre takes place after this, but within the same world, so you hear echoes of what's happened in the past with the Crusaders and the Languedoc, and it sort of centres around the sepulchre in this garden at this house and what happened there. There's kind of like a mystery going on as well. I really enjoyed it. This is Sepulchre, just if you're wondering. So again, 1891, so this is set in 1209, this is 1891, so as you can see it's much later. And then 2007. She has this ability to tie these 2 timelines together in such a seamless way that I just love it so much. As for the Kate Moss books, I would definitely say, you know, feel free to have a look at them. Those are the two first ones that I read, and that were my favourite. She also did a little mini quick read called The Cave, which is probably one of my favourite stories she's ever written. It's less than 100 pages, and she developed that into a full novel called Winter Ghosts. I'm not as keen on Winter Ghosts as I am on The Cave. I just think the story in The Cave is much better than the one in Winter Ghosts, but you know, that's just me. The Citadel also is kind of like so it goes between sort of the Languedoc period and World War II, so it's or World War II and now in the book. It's just so well done. You see so many characters come back. It's just I really need to reread the series because I'm now getting excited for it again. The next is a duology that I've also discovered my friend Tori really likes as well, and that is Witch Child and Sorceress by AZebraReads. So I didn't know about Sorceress until much later, but Witch Child is one that I picked up in, I think, early high school, maybe even before that, and it is one of the things that I love in historical fiction. I read this years ago, forgot about it, something triggered a memory, and I went out on the hunt for it, found the book, reread it, absolutely loved it again, and decided to look more in it, which is when I then found Sorceress. So Witch Child itself is told in the form of diary entries. So it is told in entry numbers. There's entry 1, entry 2, etc, 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 all the way to the end, and this is told from the perspective of a girl who goes to live in this village in, I think it's not in Salem, but it's near Salem. She is the granddaughter of a witch, and this is at the start of the witch hunts in this area in America. She is an orphan living with a family, and she is an outsider, granddaughter, like I say, a witch, so she is quite easily targeted. She also befriends one of the natives in the area, which makes her an even bigger target. Because this is told in diary entries, I always found this really compelling, because you're telling her story and sort of from her perspective. And then the family that's there finds the diary, or the mother finds the diary, and they decide to sew it into a quilt so that it's hidden in case anybody comes around, because she's admitting things that will get her killed. And the last entry in this is from the perspective of that woman, the mother. I think she's a mother that helps her, and because her last diary entry stops really suddenly. And the reason I'm telling you this, even though it happens right at the end, is because this is transcribed from diary entries that Celia Rees was part of she was a historian herself, and the team that she was working with discovered a quilt with diary entries sewn into the squares, and she decided to transcribe that into the story. So this story is true, this story is real, this story happened. These are the transcribed diary, this is the transcribed diary of this girl, and it totally blew me away to read that. This is why I love certain historical fictions, and why I love very based on a true story historical fictions, because this ignited a love of history in me. This ignited a love of first degree sort of historical texts, so things that existed at the time were taken at the time, like this diary entry. And once the diary ended, we obviously don't know what happened to our main character, whose name I cannot remember. Mary. So by the end of this book, we don't know what happens to Mary. But then comes Sorceress, because Celia Rees, just like me, is not satisfied with this ending, with this open ending. So what she did is, this is a fully fictionalised novel, in the sense that this has source material. In this, Celia Rees decided to put her history hat on, put her researcher hat on, and she went digging. She went digging for any sign of Mary, anything that happened, that she could sort of work out what happened to Mary after this diary finished. And she found quite a lot, and she decided to connect the dots and create this fiction story to sort of tell the further story of Mary and what happened to her, and sort of going forward from that. And I absolutely love that she did that, because I needed to know what happened to Mary, and she gave us that story so well, other than just a footnote or a couple of pages in the end of her book to say, oh, there was news of Mary, blah 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 blah. No, she made it into this fabulous novel, and these two just show so well how those early days in America were. Before it was even America, it was still colonies. It was in the 1600s, I believe. And it's just, there are so many things that you wouldn't ever think about, and things that we have in such an easy way, but some of the ways that people are persecuted is still the same. I cannot tell you how much I love this duology, especially Witch Child, because it's told in Mary's own words, but translated to standard modern English. Moving on in quite a surprisingly well way The next is The Asylum by Karen Coles. This is a book set in the early 1900s to 1906, and it's about a main character called Maud, who is sent to an asylum because she is mad, she is hysterical, she is different, she is dangerous. But is she? Or are they just putting her in there because she dares to speak her mind and be slightly different? This is a book that looks at the institutionalisation of especially women back in the days where any difference, any sort of slight from the norm was seen as severely bad. To the point, like I say, these people were institutionalised. So think of like American Horror Story season 2, I think it was. This is the kind of environment she's in. She's getting, you know, she's been beaten, tortured, electroshock therapy, gaslighted up the wazoo, and you see sort of her Maud's life. I have to check there. Maud's life while she's in the asylum, and also what led up to her being in the asylum, and it's just. Maud is certain that she is not mad, but is also uncertain that she might actually be mad, because doesn't everybody who's mad think they're not mad? And through this novel, you truly don't know who to believe. You start thinking you're mad as you're reading it. It's just so twisted and convoluted, and you can't be sure how reliable Maud is as a narrator, because she's not sure how reliable she is. And a lot of that is because other people who should be trustworthy, so doctors and, you know, clergy and other people like that, are telling her one story, but she believes another story. But because of that, she is seen as mad. And it's just so well done. This one has so many disturbing things about it, and I queried whether or not to put it down as a thriller rather than a historical fiction. So if you're going into it, please know that. But I just love this study of madness, of the way that people are treated when they defy the norm. You know, it's just fabulous, and it's something that I feel like we don't look into enough, and we just kind of try and cover up in our own history because it's just easier to pretend it didn't happen. I just absolutely adore this, and if that's your sort of thing, you will love this. Next up is one of my favourite books of all time. I've not stopped thinking about this book since I read it, and that is Random Acts of Heroic Love by Danny Scheinman. This is a really, really battered, probably my most battered book. It's got a broken spit, look at that. That's ridiculous. I got this for like 20p or something at a market, and this is set during World War I, and our main character, so it's set World War I, 1917 and 1992, so again, split timelines, and the story that really sticks with me is the one in 1917. So in 1917, Moritz is fighting in the Great War, so World War I, and is taken to a prisoner of war camp in Siberia. And, you know, conditions, they were supposed to be better than certain, like, you know, prisoners of war are supposed to be given a certain level of respect, but it's not always the case, and he decides that he wants to go home, so he manages to escape, and he decides to walk from Siberia back to Prussia, where he is missing his family and the girl next door who he loves, who he sort of flip-flops between wondering if she's going to wait for him or not, because he promised to come back. And you see, for Moritz, you go between his time walking back to Prussia and his memories of his time before he left. And this story just really, really stuck with me. The way that it's described and the way it's done is fantastic. And then you've got Leo in 1992, who's woken up in a hospital in South America. His girlfriend's dead, and he doesn't know where he is or how she dies. He blames himself and gets sort of sucked into this spiral of despair. And through connection with Moritz, who I believe is his father or his grandfather, he sort of comes to terms with the guilt, the despair, the depression, the grief, and it's so beautifully done. This is going to be a massive spoiler. I didn't find this out until after I read it, and I wept for a good hour afterwards. So this is going to be a bit of a spoiler. I will put my hand up when I'm spoiling and I'll put it down if you want to hear it. It might not bother you to know, it might, but I prefer not knowing, so I'll spoil it now. So basically, this novel narrates his representation of Danny's actual grandfather and the things that actually happened to him. He was a prisoner of war in Siberia, and he walked home from Siberia, and to find out that these things actually happened to someone broke me. I know it's a more common thing to do now, but when I first read this, it was the first time I'd read anything like this, so it really hit me. Okay, so spoiler over. It's funny because it's a spoiler I would use in other books, but because it hit me and the way it did, I would rather not say it. It's not even necessarily a spoiler. It's but yeah. If you want to know what it is, you've got that clip. The next was a book that I found really, really difficult to get a hold of, so God help you if you want to try and read it. And that is Dreamland Burning by Jennifer Latham. So again, this is a split timeline. I tend to like split timeline novels because I feel like it really brings the importance of history to the present, if that doesn't sound too cheesy. But this is set in the present day, so 2021, I think was when it was set, and 17-year-old Rowan finds a skeleton in her family's property in a shed behind the house, and they determine it is the skeleton of a black man. It's been there for about 100 years, and it is sort of Rowan trying to figure out who this is, where they came from, what happened, and it throws her back into the past where Tulsa in 1921 had a race riot and the town burnt down basically because of this race riot that happened. And so you go back and you follow Will, who is a black boy living in Tulsa at the time, and he is obviously suffering with a lot of residual racism and the sort of everything that went on with segregation in America. This is, 1921, so it's not up to the space where there was a lot of rights or that they were really followed for black people in America. Not that things are that great right now, but you understand what I mean. And you sort of follow Will leading up to when this body is deposited, as it were. So you're figuring out what happened in the past while Rowan is, but you're getting to see through the eyes of Will, who was present at the time. And it really, really helps to reflect on the way that black people in America are treated, and the fact that although things may have changed dramatically in some ways, they really haven't in others. I cannot give this book enough praise. It's just a fantastic read, and I really recommend you read this. Again, I think it's sort of part and parcel with a lot of historical fictions that the trigger warnings are through the roof, but yeah, I definitely recommend this, and it is one of my favourite books of all time again that I've read. Next one takes us back to Salem, and that is The Lost Book of Salem. So this is by Catherine Howe, who interestingly is a great mini great granddaughter of two convicted witches at Salem. She is the great X amount of times granddaughter of Elizabeth Howe and Elizabeth Proctor, Proctor, who is the wife of John Proctor in The Crucible. So yeah, so she is a historian, and this really shows through in this book. This again follows a dual timeline. So you've got Constance, who's in the present time, who is moving back to this little place in Salem, I think it is in Salem, to clear out her grandmother's house and put it up for sale. And she discovers the sort of witchy side of her family. So her family were historically witches, and she's caught up in people who are after her in the future, in this timeline, because of something that happened back in, ye olde Salem times. You also go back to the time in Salem and follow Deliverance, and follow through Deliverance's life and what happened in the past that's now affecting Connie in the future. It's so beautifully done. I love it. Set around the background of, I believe, Harvard as well, because Connie is a Harvard professor. I might just be making that up, but for some reason that seems about right. This is just so well done. I absolutely love it, and it shows through that the main character is a historian. This, I will talk about it as well in Babel. This looks a lot at, not necessarily etymology, but the way that language and words change in sort of use. So for example, she is looking for somebody named Mercy. This is the one I always reference back to. She is looking for someone called Mercy, and she cannot find Mercy for love nor money in historical record. But being a history professor, I'm pretty sure she's a history professor, she realises that things in history aren't exactly written down properly. So here now we've got Microsoft Word and stuff that tracks what we're typing, checks your grammar, spelling, things like that. Things are double checked, things are standardised, we're all taught to read and write. Back then this was not the case, so if you could read and write that was great, and there was no standardised spelling, which is why we got things like colour has a U in the UK but not a U in the US. And you've also got to take into consideration the accent of the person that's speaking. So if I was to say something in an accent and someone's writing it down phonetically, it would sound differently. So here's where I'm going to give the example. She's looking for someone named Mercy. She cannot find a Mercy. Let me very, very badly do the Massachusetts Boston accent, or my mangled version of it, and imagine somebody who doesn't have standardised spelling writing this down. She's looking for somebody named Marcy. Marcy. M-A-R-C-Y instead of M-E-R-C-Y. All of a sudden she can find Mercy, who has been noted down as Marcy because of the accent change. And I know that's just a tiny little thing, but oh my god, I love it. If you just think about the way that a language has changed over the years because of things like that, it just boggles the mind. And this is why I hate the standardisation of English and standardisation of language, because all the different accents and the different ways of saying things and the different words that we use just have this beautiful sort of feeling to them. It's, if everything's standardised, it's so boring, but I just love this. It just blew me away. But yeah, so this is again a historical fiction back into Salem times, and if it's something you're interested in, I really, really think you should read this, because Catherine Howe is a historian. Like I've said, I think for the 5th time, she does it really, really well, and her writing style is very accessible. Next up, this book I picked up because it was noted as for fans of Kate Moss and Kate Morton, and it is a haunting novel about two women separated by decades but entwined by fate, which is absolutely what Kate Moss does. It's an excellent way of describing it, and that is The Girl in the Photograph by Kate Riordan. So this is a very strange book. I don't know if it's just because the time period I find very strange. So set in 1933 over a summer, Alice arrives at this manor to, I think, become the new wife. It's kind of Rebecca-esque. She's the new wife of the guy that lives there, and there is this painting of his former wife Elizabeth, it says, whose only trace remains in the few tantalisingly blurred photographs. Why will no one speak of her? What happened a generation ago to make her vanish? So Alice is then sort of pulled into this mystery and is struggling to make sure that her life does not become the same as Elizabeth's. Is it the husband? Does she try and become the husband? I don't remember now, I'm getting really confused, but I always remember it having a Rebecca-esque feel to it. It's that sort of, again, with that hint of madness where she sort of works up this conspiracy in her head and starts to echo the life that Elizabeth has while she's trying to figure out what happened to her. And she believes that she believes that Elizabeth was murdered and that there's a whole conspiracy to cover it up going on, while in the background you are learning that Alice seems to be going mad slowly, just going slightly mad, and that seems to be that you're figuring out that Elizabeth had gone slightly mad. But is it because there's madness in the air, madness haunting the property? Was it her husband that made her go mad, or was gaslighting her to the point where he killed her? It's just so gripping, and you become paranoid, you don't trust anybody. But at the same time you're like, well, is it as insidious as she is making it out to be, or are these innocent interactions that she is working up because she is so suspicious? It's just so well done, and I never knew what was coming until the end. The twist at the end just totally blindsided me, and I was like, touche. I would definitely read more Kate Riordan. I really need to look into that because I've kind of fallen off the historical fiction. I barely had any contemporary books before this, by the way. This is all in the most of this is in the last year. I will have, because historical fiction is my thing, and I read this not last year, year before, or maybe the year before that, 2020 maybe? Anyway, and then went on a kick with contemporaries, so it's been a while since I read this, but I still remember that haunting, chilling feeling, and it gives you that feeling you're in, it's summer in the countryside by this lake, and it's beautiful and it's warm, but it's cold, and it's just so good. Next, again, is one, I just love all these historical fiction, but I don't know why I keep saying one of my all-time favourites, because they're all pretty much that, and that is Revolution by Jennifer Donnelly. I think I've talked about this before, but I can't remember when. This, again, is a sort of alternate history, dual timeline historical fiction. So you've got back in the time of the French Revolution, and then the present time for the book, whenever it was written. And this one I did pick up because the main character's name is Andy, spelled A-N-D-I. And look at this beautiful hardcover. Anyway, it's been years since I've read this, I'm just going to read this. It says, 2 girls united in a quest to save a young prince, but separated by over 200 years. Andy lives in present-day New York and is dealing with the aftermath of her brother's accidental death. Alexandrine lives in Paris and is desperately trying to save a young boy from the ravages of the French Revolution. Their paths collide as Andy unlocks a route into the past, which might just hold the key to reconciling herself to her own history and her future. So she basically finds a way to go back into the accidentally stumbles across the way that she goes back into the past and into Alexandrine's body, and so she's seeing this firsthand from Alexandrine's point of view. She knows what happens in the future to the royal family and to the sort of lords and things like that, and then goes back and is the governess to Alexandrine, is the governess to Prince Louis, the Dauphin, and she falls in love with this little boy. He's only a child, and I mean a young child when this happens, and because she knows what is going to happen to him, regardless of the time, people are calling to kill the royals, and she doesn't want this little boy to end up dead, but she also wants to survive herself in the past. So it's just that fight. And then when she goes back to the future, she's dealing with the fact that her own brother's dead, wondering if maybe these are dreams and hallucinations because she couldn't save her own brother. And all the while she's also a musician, and she is working on composing a piece and looking into musical history in France at the time. And it's just, there's so many different facets that are just pulled in so well together, and it all maps out and all meets up really, really well. It's just absolutely fantastic. If you read one alternate history, historical fiction, please read this one. This is the one that just, I cannot give this book enough praise, and I'm going to have to reread all my historical fictions now, aren't I? I also have to say this dust jacket is actually done in like a parchment paper, which just makes it even better. The next book is one that almost made it onto my top 22 of 2022, and that is Next Year in Havana by Chanel Clayton. This is a based on a true story historical fiction about the sort of end of the 50s in Havana in Cuba, when Cuba decided to shut itself down to foreigners and take on a regime that was more sort of for the people, but not really. I think it was, is it communism? Is it just communism? It might just be communism. But because of certain things within the regime, members of high society were also had to flee. So this family had to flee from Havana to Miami, and it's split in the timeline between Elizabeth in Havana before she has to flee, and her granddaughter Marisol in Miami, who then goes back to Cuba to figure out what happens, inserted with other members of the family and things like that. And it's just so well done. I absolutely loved it. The parts in Cuba have a very similar feel to Dirty Dancing too, so it's that sort of thing where, you know, when the Americans were sort of kicked out of Cuba and it was all shut down, and people had to flee for their lives. It was fighting on the streets, and it was just, it was a revolution, but it was also very isolating for Cubans, and it's just so well done. So Elizabeth falls in love with someone who, on the other side, basically. She falls in love with someone who's part of the revolution, whereas her family are in high society, so she cannot be. And we just follow her life, and it is a difficult life, although she is wealthy. And then Marisol trying to figure out, because there are some things that they won't talk about in their family. She's trying to figure out what happened in Cuba and find, you know, people, that this man that our grandmother loved back in Cuba, find out what happened to him. It's just so beautifully done, and each book follows a different family member from the generation that's in Cuba. So her aunt is very prominent, at least in the end of this, and her great aunt, sorry, and the next one follows her great aunt, who just sounds like a total character. She's fabulous in the 1950s like side of it. I'm looking forward to reading more of this, because it's very interesting, especially somewhere like Cuba that isolated itself for so long, to get stories out of there that you don't really get. It's the same thing sort of Ruta Sepetys does, where she discusses times that you don't necessarily, or places in times that you don't necessarily get to see. You'll see that a lot in my World War II historical fiction ones. There is The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys, which I did think about putting in this video but didn't, which again is like an alternate. So it's Spain during the revolution there, which you don't get to see a lot in history. And finally these stories are being told, or these stories are being teased out from people who were so traumatised that they didn't want to speak about it, or were forbidden for so long to speak about it. And that's what this does so well, and the care that has gone into this is just unfathomable. The next one is one that I think is a bit strange for me, and that is The Game of Love and Death by Martha Brockenborough. This is a very difficult book to describe fully. Basically, every so often, love and death, who are beings, like mythical beings in this world, make a bet. They each pick a player, and they have a certain amount of time in which to fall in love, and if they do, love wins and they get to live. If they don't, death takes them, and she is not nice about it. She wants to beat love, and he very much wants his players to survive. So they're not allowed to directly influence this decision or the actions, although they do have little like sneaky ways of doing it. And this round is set in America in the Jazz Age in Seattle, and it follows a sort of rich white boy and a poor black girl who they sort of push together to fall in love. And obviously the Jazz Age in America, places like Seattle, was not the place where a white boy and a black girl could fall in love and be together. But at the same time, she also wants to be a pilot, which I loved, by the way. And it's just the story of them finding each other, of them falling in love in this era where everything was hard, and in the backdrop, love and death both sort of trying to slightly influence things around them to make it easier or more difficult depending on whose side they were on. And it's so difficult to try and explain this, but it's such a beautiful story, and it reminds me a lot of Carrie Hope Fletcher's On the Other Side. I know that sounds strange, but it's got that sort of magical realism thing, and it's so, I don't even know how to describe it, but I love it. And I also love that death is female and love is male, and this is like, although they're cosmic entities, love is male and death is female, whereas you'd think that the sort of knee-jerk reaction would be for them to be the opposite. So that was also a really interesting concept, and the conversations you get between love and death are just beautiful as well. This is a really strange one, but I love it so much. We are on to the last one, and it is one I've spoken about a few times this year and that you will have heard so many people speak about this year, so I won't go into too much detail. on this one. I would advise you to look at other reviews of this, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a historical fiction with magical realism in it. That's how I will shelve it. That is how I see it, because this is not a fantasy. This is not like, it's not like fantasy, like these things are, they're fantasy. This is very much historical based, and it is set in 1836. It goes back a little bit. So Robin, our main character, is taken from Canton after his family dies to London to be raised by this professor, with the sort of output of he will be entered into the Babel School at Oxford, at the university. And at Oxford they have the Babblers, who create the silver work that helps the world or the colonies run. This is very much about colonisation. This is very much about language and words and how translation can change things, change meanings. I love there's a section here that's it, and it's the, if you see the, I think it's the Illyricate one, it says an act of translation is an act of betrayal, because you're effectively betraying the initial language or the initial meaning by translating it in a way that doesn't give it its full meaning. So again, like I said in my other video, it's like when someone says, oh, there's a word for that in this language that doesn't really translate well to English, for example. This is sort of the discussion that's had in this. For me, the biggest discussion in this was the discussion of colonialism and etymology, language, translation. It is very much a nerdy historical fiction, and if you, I mean, I know other people have enjoyed it that maybe didn't look at it in such a way, but you can really, really get into this. You can really, really like sink your teeth into this and research the etymology of words, and the way that R.F. Kuang talks about the way that words change and how they change from one language to another, from Latin to English, from, you know, is it the change of a letter? Is it a change of a meaning? Because there are words that we use nowadays that have a different meaning. So ignorant is a great word, I think, for this example. Ignorant in the base term, and the initial term that it was created for, is to not know something. So if you're ignorant of something, you do not know about it. You are unknowing of it. You have no knowledge of it. However, nowadays we use the term ignorant to describe someone who is just being rude in a specific way. So we've turned it into a verb that is almost a twist on the original meaning. So a lot of the time somebody's being ignorant, to me, I understand it as they're being dismissive and rude about something that they know very little about. So they will not learn about it, they will not even ask questions, they will just be ignorant. And it's willful ignorance almost, in the sort of original term of the word. And for some people, they don't like people using that term because it's not correct. It's a different way of using the word, but this is how language changes. This is how language develops and evolves. And if you look now at certain words, they don't mean the same thing as they did X amount of years ago. Gay, again, is a great example of a word. Gay nowadays refers to someone who is predominantly male and homosexual. So a man who loves men, or men who are attracted to men, tends to be your sort of accepted version of gay. You can also use gay for any sort of same-sex relationship, but predominantly gay is specific to men. But go back 100 or so years and gay meant happy. Not even 100 or so years. Gay was a term for happy. And it would be used, when you said gay to Austen, for example, she would see it in a totally different way. It would not have the same meaning. That meaning has changed over the years. You find a lot of that with the LGBTQ plus language, that it changes over time, which is part of what I find so interesting about it. And there's masses of discussion to have around language and the evolution of language and the evolution of translation and how things like that work, because translation there's no such thing as a perfect translation, and that's one of the things that our Kwang looks at in here. A lot of people would review this book as it is, as a historical fiction, the way it looks at colonialism, the way it looks at the characters who are taken from, you know, places that they lived as children and are taught to be brought up in this empire and this colonial background and help the colonies to harm their own people, basically. And that's a fabulous way to look at this as well. I love it for the etymology and the way the words are done, but the discussion of colonialism in here, the discussion of, you know, the whole us and them, and it's so fantastically well done. And Lottie, is it Lottie her name is? I can't remember names now, but there's one of the characters, she is, so all of you've got 4 main characters, Robin, Rami, Victoire, and I think it's Lottie, I'm probably wrong, and they are each in their own way part of a marginalised group. So we've got Robin, who is Chinese, specifically Cantonese, and he has sort of privilege for being male but not privilege for being a person of colour. Rami, again, who is male but he is Indian, so he is a person of colour. Victoire, she is a woman and also a woman of colour, so she is, you know, she's got none of the privilege except the fact that she's intelligent. And then you've got Lottie, whose name I'm pretty sure I'm getting wrong, but that's what we're going to call her, and Letty, her name is Letty. You've got Letty, who is white, so she has that privilege. She's from a, you know, high up family, she has that privilege, but she is a girl, so she has that sort of dip in privilege. And that discussion is had, and the discussion of the differences in those kind of privilege, because Letty can't understand what it's like to be a person of colour brought into this white society, and she blatantly does not understand that, and she is an idiot about it, if, you know, if we're really going to get into it, because she thinks that being treated differently as a person of colour is the same as being treated differently as a woman who is white, and it's not. There are some similarities, but it's not the same thing, and it's just so well done. There was a now famous review of Babel where someone discussed how they didn't like the book because it made them feel like colonialism was wrong, colonisation was wrong, and it was bad to be white. And part of me is like, I understand, but you've missed the point so effectively that you've wrapped round and made the point again. It just there's it's one of those things where it's like, read the room, but that is exactly the discussion that's had here, and I love that Ira Kwang has used her own experience in this. She's quite clearly an exceptionally intelligent person, and her writing reflects that so well, but at the same time this is vastly superior to so many other books that I feel have tried to do this, because it is so accessible. Absolutely love this. It is, but again, I'll sort of lean on the fact that it is historical fiction that deals with these things with like, there's a magic system in it just to make it, I don't know, a little more interesting isn't the word I was looking for, but like, it just gives you that extra plot point, I suppose, to drive it home, to make it a little more exciting and engaging, to have that discussion of etymology, translation, language, colonialism, colonisation, disparages and privilege, and it's just, there's so much, like, no wonder this book is as big as it is, because there's so much wrapped into this book and it's so beautifully done. And it's just, I said I wasn't going to say much about this, and I think I've rambled on about this for so long. I will scream about this book forever. I really regret saying that I don't think I'd like this book. Actually, do you know what? Every time I say I don't think I like something, I end up loving it, and this is one of these books that I just will never stop thinking about. So there we go. Those are my recommendations off of my own shelves for historical fictions that cover other time zones or other times that are not World War II, if that makes sense. I highly recommend all of these books. Obviously I wouldn't be showing you them. If you want to discuss any of them, please do discuss them with me, discuss them with other people. If I inspire you to read them, please let me know. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this. Again, I've got over an hour of raw footage. I don't know how long the video is actually going to be. If you got all the way through this, thank you very much for watching, and I will stop there and I will see you in another video. Bye!